And maybe I'm not sure that what I say is more important than what my dear friend has to offer. Probably not. And I apologize for being late, but I'm coming from an other shir, and Baruch Hashem, life is very hectic. So once again, we're together after Chag HaShavuos, and our eyes are focused on the next stop. So there's a beautiful story I told many times, and I heard this story from an Alta Polish Chosid. And one of the biggest Jewish centers in Poland was Lodz. After Warsaw, Lodz, tens of thousands of Hasidim lived in Lodz. The family comes from Lodz. And Lodz was the biggest center of Alexander Hasidim. In Bnei Brak, there's an Alexander Rebbe, was a real big tzaddik. And there was one shtibel, which they called the Chofetz Chaim shtibel. Why would a shtibel of Alexander Hasidim be called the Chofetz Chaim shtibel? So the Chofetz Chaim was a traveler, which means, many times I explained what was unique about the Chofetz Chaim. There were so many Gedolim and so many Tzaddikim in that generation. What was unique about the Chofetz Chaim was 100% dedicated to Klal Yisrael. Whatever he wrote, whatever he did was out of the deepest conviction, this is what the generation needs. So there are no sforim from the Chofetz Chaim commentary on Shas, even though he is one of the greatest Gedolim of his time. Because in the eyes of the Chofetz Chaim, we have enough Meforshim. We have the Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritva. We have the Pnei Yeshua and the Marsha and so many other great Meforshim. He didn't write Shalas Teshuvos because there were so many other great Gedolim that could give psak to the questions that arise. When he wrote the Mishnah Brura, he writes in his introduction, this is a need for Klal Yisrael, and indeed it was. Because there were so many svarim written on Shulchan Aruch Chaim, and sometimes such a huge database, a person, Einoi Moitzi Yoda V'Raglav, you don't really have psak, and that is where the Chofetz Chaim stepped in. He wrote Avos Chesed because he saw that the generation is not enough diligent in tzedakah and in chesed. He wrote a sefer Machne Yisrael dedicated to young Jewish soldiers that were forced into the Russian army. Whatever the Chofetz Chaim did, he did for Klal Yisrael. So he happened to be in Lodz, and it happened to be Erev Rosh Chodesh, and he needs to daven mincha. So he stepped into a Hasidic shtibel. A younger man goes to the Yomed, Ashrei Yoish V'Veisecho, and the Chofetz Chaim says, Yom Kippur Kotten. And that Chosid asks him, what's that? Nobody in Lodz knew what's Yom Kippur Kotten. We never heard about Yom Kippur Kotten. We know about Yom Kippur, but that's once a year. What's Yom Kippur Kotten? And the Chofetz Chaim said, well, bring any siddur, and I'll show you in every siddur we have Yom Kippur Kotten Erev Rosh Chodesh. So the Chosid says, the Rebbe sagt nicht. The Rebbe doesn't say. And as you all know, if the Rebbe doesn't say, neither do the Hasidim. So the Chofetz Chaim says this beautiful mashal, and it's amazing how he had these mashalim on the spur of the moment. That's Ruach HaKodesh. So the Chofetz Chaim says, Em shelacho mashal l'mohado v'doima. Two Jews happened to meet each other in the central train station in Warsaw. Two Jews, as Jews go, one approaches the other, Shalom Aleichem, wie fuhrt Ayid? Where are you going? He says, well, I'm going to Krakow. His friend says, wonderful, I'm going to Krakow as well. We could sit together, we could share Sipuri Tzadikim. Great. 10 minutes later, the first stop, Mr. Aleph gets up, stretches out his hand to Mr. B, and he says, "Have a great day. Didn't you say you're going to Krakow?" And he said, "Of course." And he smiles. He says, "You seem to be rich. You could afford a ticket from Warsaw all the way to Krakow. I don't have that type of money." So I get off by every stop, walk into the local stiebel, collect a bissel geld just to get to the next stop. I hope by tomorrow afternoon I'll make it to Krakow. We could meet then. So the Chofetz Chaim says, your Rebbe is rich. He's rich in Torah and in mitzvahs. He could make it miyoyim HaKippurim hazeh ad yoyim HaKippurim habo aleinu letoiva. We don't have that type of money. We don't have those chusim. We need to get off by every stop. And that is Yom Kippur Kodesh. So we need to get off the train every year of Rosh Chodesh and say vidui and say slichas. Your Rebbe doesn't need Yom Kippur Kodesh, but we do. What could you say when the Chofetz Chaim gives such a beautiful mashal? So they said Yom Kippur Kodesh. Could you say no to the Chofetz Chaim? And then the Hasidim told the Rebbe, we had an amazing guest in our shtibel, and we said Yom Kippur Kodesh. And the Rebbe was moved, and the Rebbe said, I want this shtibel to say Yom Kippur Kodesh every year of Rosh Chodesh. And that was the Chofetz Chaim shtibel in Lodz. So, Shavuos is behind us, and we're looking for the next stop, and we need to take advantage of every stop along the way. The next stop seems to be a bit far away, and that is Shavuos B'Tammuz in 3 weeks. So let's speak about the Vachadika Parsha, this week's Parsha. At the end of this week's Parsha, Parsha Shalach, we have one of the greatest mitzvahs. There are only a handful of mitzvahs about which Chazal say, Shkulo mitzvahs tzitzis keneged kol ha-mitzvahs shebetoira. Mitzvahs tzitzis compares, and it is as important as all the others combined. Why is mitzvahs tzitzis so important? Yes, the Pasuk says, Ureisem oisoi uzachartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem vasisem oisem. So mitzvahs tzitzis is a reminder. Your tzitzis are out there and you're called upon all day. Remember all the other mitzvahs. Why does mitzvahs tzitzis remind all the rest? And this is a very fundamental question. In Siman Chof Hey in Shulchan Aruch Arachaim, Shulchan Aruch says, every day in the morning, first we put on our talis, and then we put on tefillin. And the Beis Yosef explains, why does tzitzis come before tefillin? So the Gemara has a certain list of priorities. When we're dealing with different mitzvahs, what comes first, what comes second, what has precedence? Todir v'she'enoi todir koidem. A mitzvah that is relevant every day comes before a mitzvah that does not apply every day. So tzitzis is more todir than tefillin because tzitzis is a mitzvah each and every day of the entire year, including Shabbos and Yom Tov. Tefillin is not. Tefillin we put on only on weekdays. That is one reason tzitzis becomes before tefillin. The other is because tzitzis is more mikudash than tefillin. It's a more important mitzvah. And why is that? Because shkula mitzvah tzitzis keneged kol ha-mitzvah shebetoira. And then one would wonder, tefillin is a chiyuv. Tefillin is mandatory. Tefillin is an obligation. You need to put on tefillin every day. And if you skip the day, that's bad. Tzitzis is not an obligation only if we wear a garment that has dalet kanfos. It is only if the garment has 4 corners. A person could go through his entire life never wearing tzitzis, And that would not be considered a sin. Because if I didn't wear a garment that has 4 corners, I'm not mechuyev in tzitzis. So one would wonder, if tzitzis is so important, and it is one of a handful of mitzvahs which are as important as all the others put together, and more important than tefillin, why is tefillin a chiyuv and tzitzis is not? And that is a very big question. And my answer is this. Tefillin is about royalty. Tefillin is majesty. Pe'echo chovesh olecho. When you wear your tefillin on your head, that is like a crown. Ve'ro'o kol amei ha'oretz ki shem Hashem nikro olecho v'yoro mimeko. When all the other nations will see the tefillin on your forehead, they will be in awe and in fright. Kol yisol b'nei malachim. What is tzitzis all about? That's a Gemara, Menachos Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Chotam shel tit. It is a tar seal, a seal made of tar. Tcheles, chotam shel zahav, is a golden seal. But the fundamental mitzvah of tzitzis, which is defined as lavan, chotam shel tit. Tosfos on the spot explains, in days of yore, a slave had a seal on his beged, on his garment. Lahavdil, like the yellow star that Jews needed to wear under the Nazi regime, Yamach Shemam V'Zichram. So a slave had a certain symbol on his garment. I am a slave. And that is the tzitzis. Tefillin is royalty. Tzitzis is servitude. It is slavery. Royalty is imposed on us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yes, you are my chosen people. You are the princes of this world. So tefillin is a chayva. Avdus, HaKadosh Baruch Hu prefers, I want you to be happy about him. I want you to choose Avdus out of free will. I heard a story many years ago from the Lev Simcha. The Lev Simcha was the Gerer Rebbe. And this goes back about 40 years. And he told a story that he heard from his great father, the Imre Emes. That his father, who was the Sfas Emes, not everybody is familiar with the Lev Simcha. More people are familiar with the Imre Emes, but everybody knows about the Sfas Emes. Everybody learns Sfas Emes. So the Imre Emes told the story. My great father once, it was Chalamoid Sukkos by the Tish, said, V'mezokt unu Hashem kemen poilen de greste Sachen. Well, looking at your faces, probably most of you didn't understand what I just said. So the Sfas Emes says, when we say Ono Hashem in Hallel, you could achieve the greatest things. And the Imre Emes said, there was an argument between the Hasidim. Which Ono Hashem does he mean? Does he mean Ono Hashem Oshiano, or maybe Ono Hashem Atzlichano? The other day in the morning when they said Hallel in the shul of the Sfas Emes, 50% of Hasidim shouted at the top of their lungs, Ono Hashem Ashiano, and all the others shouted, Ono Hashem Atzlichano. And the Imre Emes said, but I understood that he meant neither Ono Hashem Ashiano, nor Ono Hashem Atzlichano. What he had in mind was, Ono Hashem ki ani avdecha, ani avdechu ben amosecha. This is the story. Now let me give you my pshat in this story, my interpretation. So what is so great about Ono Hashem ki ani avdecha? In the entire Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, and I say this with full authority, in the entire Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, only twice do we find the words Simcha Yesera. Only twice do we find this phrase, this combination of two words, Simcha Yesera, which means excessive Simcha, or total Simcha, or full Simcha. Where do we find this expression? In Hilchas Chanukah. Who said Sukkah? It's not in Hilchas Sukkah, but it's about Sukkahs. And that is the end of Hilchas Lulav, the Rambam writes. Af al pisha kol hamoyed mitzvah lesmoach behem, b'yamei hachag hoysu sham simcha yesera. And that is Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So the Rambam writes, the period of the year, the time of the Jewish calendar in which there was the greatest Simcha was Sukkot. Where else does the Rambam write Simcha Yesera? Perek Gimel and Hilchas Chanukah. Ein oimer Mahalel b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yom HaKippurim. We don't say Hallel in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Lefi she'ein elu yomim shel Simcha Yesera, elu shel Eimo v'Yira. We don't say Hallel in the high holidays, in the days of awe, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because these are not days of excessive Simcha, but rather days of fright and awe. So only twice do we find Simcha Yesera. In what context? Hallel, Sukkot. So a Jew by Hallel and Sukkot says, Onu Hashem ki ani avdecha. Did you ever notice or realize Onu Hashem Oishiano, Onu Hashem Aslicha is Aleph Nun Aleph. Onu Hashem ki ani avdecha is Aleph Nun Hey. Pronounced the same way, sounds the same, but it's a different word. What is the difference between the two? The greatest grammarist, the greatest medaktek of the Rishonim was the Radak, Reb David Kimchi. And he explains on Tehillim, Ono with an Aleph is a plea. We plea, we beg HaKadosh Baruch Hu, help us, give us Atzlacha. Ono with a Hey is an expression of gratitude. Ono Hashem Kirevdecho, we say, thank you, Hashem. What are you thanking for? We thank because we are servants. We thank that you have us as slaves. We are so happy to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu's servants. Shteit Yid stands a Jew in the height of the greatest Simcha. Kiflayim Simcha Yesera, saying Hallel and Sukkot. And all he has to say is, thank you, Hashem. I am so happy. And what am I thanking for? I thank you because I am your servant. That is Simchas HaAvdus. And that is the highest level a Jew could ever reach. So thousands of years ago, we all stood at the foot of Har Sinai. And we all shouted out together, Nasa v'nishma. And Tosfos asks a fundamental question in Shabbos Pei Zayin. There seems to be a contradiction in the same blot of Gemara between two different Mamorei Chazal. On one hand, Chazal talk about the exalted moment when we all shouted out Nasa v'nishma. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, wow, my children are like angels of above. And in the same blot, the Gemara says, Kafo aleim har kegigis. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu threatened them. The overturned mountain on top of their heads. If you're not going to say yes, I will bury you all. So Tosfos asked, how did it look? What happened? Were they coerced and forced to say Nasa v'nishma? Or was it out of their free will? Tosfos has a teretz. It's legitimate. I take the liberty of offering another teretz. Libi oimali. Kodesh Baruch asks the Jewish people, are you interested in Torah? Instinctively, intuitively, of course they'll say yes. They got one bonus after another. Every day, sandwiches, man, every day a fleshing a meal, slav. Mineral water wherever they went. Be'ero shel Miriam. Everything was air conditioned. Ananei kavod. They got one gift after the other. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, do you want Torah? Instinctively they'll say yes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Kindalach, I want you to understand. What I'm offering now is not another gift package. What I'm offering now is a burden. What I'm offering now is total servitude, unconditional surrender, slavery. Up to now, all you had is Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which boiled down to just be a mensch. Just be a mensch, be a decent human being. Don't rob, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. From now on, it is 24/7. And I will dictate and demand not only your deeds and actions, but what you say. And not only what you say, what you think. And not only what you think, what you feel. And I want you to understand, this is what I'm offering. What is the symbol of Avdus? That's a Gemara in Yavamis Memvav. And the Gemara says, when we buy a slave, and he needs to do tefillah, as he sticks his head out of the water, we place a vessel over his head. And that vessel covering his head is the symbol of servitude. And that turns the tefillah into tefillah zavnis. It is clear in my mind, kofu aleim har kigigis. It was like a vessel, a huge vessel over the collective heads of an entire people. And suddenly, there was no sunlight, and they all looked up. What did they see? They saw a huge kli, gigas, and it dawned upon them, oh, this is about Avdus. This is not another gift package. This is Avdus. This is total servitude. Va'af al pi kein hegdimu nasa lenishma. And that is why that was so great and so super. Being aware and fully aware what it incurs, what it means, they said, yes, this is what we choose. Ono Hashem ki ani avdecha. Whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu refers to Moshe Rabbeinu, his most beloved son, how does HaKadosh Baruch Hu call Moshe Rabbeinu? It's just last week's Pasha. We read it this last Shabbos in Pasha's Baloischa. Avdi Moshe. Not Beni. Avdi Moshe. Lo chein Avdi Moshe. Madua lo yoresem ledabe ba'avdi b'Moshe. In Kedusha Lamed Hey, the Gemara says, when are we called Bonim? When are we called Avodim? When we're good, we're called Bonim. Bisman Shoysen Etzoyin Shamokim. When we're bad, we're called Avodim. Bisman She'ein Osim Retzon Shamokim. So why is Moshe Rabbeinu called an Eved? You know why? Because of the tefillah we say Shabbos in the morning. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelkoi ki Eved nemen korosarai. Avdus out of love, Avdus out of simcha, that is a greater title than being a ben. Because a son is a son, not out of choice. You're a son because you were born the son to your father. But when you choose Avdus, and you say, Ono Hashem ki ani avdecho, thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for letting me serve. That is greater than being a ben. That is higher and greater than Bonim Lamakim. And that is why tzitzis is not an obligation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to force us into Avdus. No, no, no. That is not the Avdus I expect of you. I want you to choose Avdus, like Moshe Rabbeinu, like you did 3,000 years ago, when together with all the others, you said, Nasa v'nishma. This is what we choose. This is what we want. This is what we love. So the Sfasema said, when you say, Ono Hashem, you could achieve the greatest heights. And his son, the Imre Emes, said, I knew what he means. He did not have in mind Ono Hashem, Oshia no, nor Ono Hashem Atzmicha no. That's for yourself. What he had in mind is Ono Hashem ki ani avdecho. Thank you, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you for having us. Thank you for letting us volunteer. This is what we want. This is what we choose. This is what we love. So each and every day, we need to be Makalam Ol Malchus Shamayim and say, thank you, Hashem, for having us. Thank you for choosing us. And we are willing every day anew to say, Nasa v'nishma. And thank you, Kodesh Baruch Hu, Ono Hashem, ki ani avdecha, ani avdecha, ben amusecha. And that is what being a Jew is all about. So the Sifra Misa talk a lot about Simchas HaTorah, Simchas HaMitzvah, but more fundamental than any other concept is Simchas HaAvdus. Just thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for choosing us as his beloved people. Out of the billions that walk the face of earth, and each and every one of them is a Tzelem Elokim, according to all the commentaries in Perek Gimel of Masechet Avos. Chavavodam shenivra b'tzelem. Every human being is precious into himself. But the same Mishnah says, Chavavodam shenivra b'tzelem, Chibi Yasera noidas lo shenivra b'tzelem Elokim, Chavivin Yisrael shenikru bonam l'makoim. Chibi Yasera noidas lehem shenitan lehem klei chemda. And I say, Chavivin Yisrael shenikra'u avodem l'makoim. If that is what they choose, that is the madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelkoi ki eved neman karoso loi. So we should thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu every moment of our lives to be who we are, to be Jewish, to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chosen people. We know what it incurs. Life isn't easy. It would be far easier to be on the other side of the fence, but this is what we would choose every day anew. And every day we would once again say, Nasa v'nishma. It's not easy, but it is what we choose, and we are happy to carry this burden. So thank you, Hashem. Ono Hashem, ki ani avdecha, ani avdecha, ben amasecha. We should be Zoche B'Korov to be as Mashiach Tzidkenu.